All right, seventh graders, this is to help you prepare for question 5 on your equation test next week. This question says, if negative 1/5 times the quantity m plus 7 is equal to 10, what is the value of m? Now, back in the day, I used to be the 7-8 teacher, and Mrs. Van Dyke was the straight 7 accelerated teacher. So I know she and I solve equations with the distributive property differently. So I'm going to show you both methods, and I like both methods, and it's whatever way you're most comfortable. So here's how I always solve these equations. I always take my, negative 1/5 times the quantity m plus 7 is equal to 10. And my initial reaction to this is always to take the number in front of the set of parentheses and distribute it through to clear out those parentheses. So that's just how I go about the problem. So I do negative 1/5 times m is negative 1/5 m plus negative 1/5 times a positive 7. I know that's the same as 7/1. A negative times a positive, I say, okay, that's actually a negative. So I take this and I change that to a minus because a negative times a positive is a negative. 1/5 times 7/1 is 7/5. Then I keep my equals 10. At that point, I solve this just like I solve any two-step equation. I say, okay, I have to undo my addition or subtraction to move my constant over to the right-hand side. So how do I undo subtraction? I undo subtraction with addition. So I add 7/5 to both sides. On the left-hand side, those minus 7/5 plus 7/5 zero out, and I'm left with negative 1/5 equals 10 plus 7/5. So you have a calculator that you can use. I'm going to use some scrap work here. I'm going to do 10 plus 7/5. 10 is the same as 10/1. I have to come up with a common denominator, so I'm going to multiply numerator and denominator of my first fraction by 5. 5 times 10 is 50. 5 times 1 is 5. So I now have 50/5 plus 7/5. 50 plus 7, that's 57/5. So I come up with 57/5. Ooh, what did I lose with my negative 1/5 on this side? Well, that's a problem. If that negative 1/5 has an m attached, you better not lose that m. Negative 1/5 m is equal to 57/5. Then I say, what's the operation between the negative 1/5 and the m? The operation between the negative 1/5 and the m is multiplication. How do I undo multiplication? I undo multiplication with division. I'm going to divide by whatever that coefficient of m was so I can get a fancy form of 1. If this is a negative 1/5, I need to divide by a negative 1/5. Negative divided by a negative would give me a positive. 1/5 divided by 1/5 would give me a 1. 1 times m is just m. If I'm going to divide by negative 1/5 on the left-hand side, I have to divide by a negative 1/5 on the right-hand side of that equal sign. So here's some more scrap work. If I have 57/5 divided by a negative 1/5, that's the same as 57/5 times negative 5/1. Those 5s divide out to a fancy form of 1. 57 times a negative 1 is a negative 57. At this point, because there was common denominators, you could have divided straight across the top, straight across the bottom. 57 divided by negative 1 is negative 57. 5 divided by 5 is 1. Negative 57/1 is negative 57. So that's how I go about the equation. Now, I'm pretty positive, because this is how she did it back in the day, what Mrs. Van Dyke likes to do, call this method 2, What Mrs. Van Dyke likes to do, if she has a negative 1/5 times m plus 7 equals 10, she actually likes to undo this division outside the parentheses first. So if this is negative 1/5 times the quantity m plus 7, she undoes that multiplication by dividing by negative 1/5 on the left of the equal sign. If I'm going to divide by negative 1/5 on the left-hand side of the equal sign, I have to divide by negative 1/5 on the right-hand side. Negative divided by a negative is a positive. 1/5 divided by 1/5 is 1. 1 times m plus 7. The nice thing is she just gets an m plus 7 at that point. Here would be her little scrap work off to the side. She's got 10 divided by negative 1/5. That's the same as 10 times 5/1. That's still negative. And she'll get here 10 times negative 5/1. 10 times 5 is 50. A positive times a negative is a negative. So she gets a negative 50 right here. Now she just has to solve m plus 7 equals negative 50. Well, how do I undo addition? I undo addition with subtraction. So she subtracts. Opposite of addition is subtraction. She would subtract 7 on both sides. That allows us to get m by itself. M equals, signs are the same, find the sum, keep the sign. Negative 50 minus 7 is a negative 57. We come up with the same answer in the end. But I remember years ago walking into her classroom, and I just assumed she solved it my way. I watched her way. I was like, well, that's beautiful. And again, you'll come up with the same answer no matter how you go about solving the equation. I hope that helps.